Good evening. On tonight's episode of Feedback, we're going to be talking education. We're going to put some varying points of view on the whole education system. That's coming up tonight on Feedback. As I said, tonight we're going to be speaking with some authors of some books on education, and I'm going to forgo and get right into talking to these people. If there's time left at the end of the show, I will of course give you my opinions on what we discussed, and I have a feeling I'm going to be rather opinionated. But let me just show you real quick the two books we're going to be talking about. The first is Separating School and State, How to Liberate America's Families, this by Sheldon Richman, and then this encyclopedia here, The Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Thompson Isabeet, I believe is how you pronounce her name. I'll have to check on that. We'll be speaking with her a little bit later. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking with Sheldon Richman about separating school and state after this.
In the early years, young children cannot stand on their own.
Ask him if he wants me
Uniting parents and children is an important part of the life of a community. Stand for Children encourages people to make a personal commitment to stand for the health of children. 300,000 Americans marched in Washington, D.C. last June to support Stand for Children Day. Stand for Children seeks to lift the belief that children need our help to stand.
It's my birthday. I'm the mayor. It's my birthday.
Exercised lately?
Go for a mouthful. Go for the fun. Go for cake. Cakes for everyone. Just one stack is what it takes. And it's Gopher cakes. Open wide. Stuff your face. There's always room for more Gopher cakes. Empty the box, every load. Eat those Gopher cakes till you explode.
Exercised lately?
Till you explode.
Hi, I'm Christy Desort.
And I'm Brian Cook from TV5 News.
On behalf of the Tuesday Night News team, season's greetings and a Happy New Year.
I love these holiday greetings, especially when you get to see Christy Resort with that big red nose on. Wait till you see the other one later. But anyway, we're going to go to our first interview. We're going to be speaking with the author of this book, Sheldon Richman, author of the book Separating School and State, How to Liberate America's Families. Let's start off, Sheldon. Could you give us an overview of your book?
This is the book Separating School and State.
Yes.
The overview of the book is that government control of education, government funding, government operation of schools, etc., are inappropriate in a free society and very unlikely to give us educational quality, which is, I think, more and more obvious all the time.
Okay. Could we have you give us some of the major problems facing the education world today?
Basic problem facing education is that since it's operated by government, it is a coercive bureaucracy rather than a market enterprise. We don't get creative entrepreneurship because government is incapable of providing that. It's a bureaucracy which gets its money through the tax system, which means the taxpayers don't have much choice about it. They don't have to attract willing customers. They just take the money through the tax system, and they get their students basically through compulsion because there's compulsory attendance laws, and if students want to go to private schools, the parents have to lay out extra money. So they have almost a lock on their students. So if you have guaranteed If you have a guaranteed
Sorry
flow
about
of
that.
revenue and guaranteed students, you don't have to be terribly responsive, unlike a private business, a private enterprise, which has to attract customers. And that's the essential problem.
well,
The rest, everything else flows from that.
so how do you fix that then?
By totally divorcing education from government. Separating school and state, as the title of the book has it. This is for the same reasons we separate church and state. It's too important a matter, too personal a matter to be left to bureaucrats and politicians.
Well, obviously this is not a cheap endeavor. How do you pay for education if it's totally private?
Well, if up to this point the government were operated all the shoe factories and the shoe stores, and I came along and said, well, the shoe industry and the shoe stores ought to be privatized, someone might ask, well, how would we pay for them? Well, we know how people pay for shoes. They buy shoes. It's the same thing with education. Education, in that sense, is not different from anything else that's provided in the marketplace. It's a service. It would be paid for by people buying it for their kids.
Well,
There's no mystery.
Is that fair then? I mean, you're going to have students, you're going to obviously have some people who aren't going to be able to pay for education. So is that okay that we're going to have some students not even going to school?
Well, there's no reason to leap to that conclusion. First of all, there was a time in our history where government had very little to do, almost nothing to do with education. Some towns were involved here and there. But before 1840, there was no government, there were no state school boards, school districts, etc. Federal government had no Department of Education, and this was a highly literate society and getting more literate all the time. When the European visitors came to the young United States in the 1820s and 30s, they were amazed by how literate the society was. There were newspapers all over the place. There was pamphlets all over the place. So this was not a society where literacy was hard to come by. That included poor people. Same thing with England. England doesn't get compulsory education until 1880, and yet poor people got education. So it's a myth that education would be so expensive that a lot of people couldn't have access to it. That's just not true. And it wasn't true historically. There's no reason to believe it would be true.
Well, maybe looking for a compromise here. Something that I'm not for at all is vouchers, but we hear about it a lot more. Is that a possible compromise between making totally private schools, or is that a compromise at all? Place? No.
No, it's not. It's not a compromise. What it would do is it would extend government power over private schools, because with vouchers would come. There's no doubt about this. With vouchers would come rules, regulations, and conditions, and they would say to parents, you can take your voucher to any school on our officially approved list of schools. The question is then, how does the school get on that list? Well, we'll have to comply with a lot of conditions set by the state governments or the...
Okay, then public schools versus private schools is maybe sort of what we're going at here. What is the advantage of private schools versus, or even all private schools versus just public schools?
Well, number one, the biggest advantage is freedom. Parents will have freedom. Today, every big decision about their child's education is made by a stranger, a bureaucrat. That seems outrageous in the United States. The public schools were founded really as an assault on families. If you go back and read what the founders of the movement for what was known as the common school had to say back then in the 1830s and 40s, Horace Mann, for example, Massachusetts, they all thought that parents were basically rotten people. We had to get the kids away from them. So it was founded as an anti-family institution. They thought the politicians, the bureaucrats, the intellectuals were superior, they were anointed, they were wiser. So the thing was minimize the time that the kids spent with their parents, get them into government-approved schools. And so the first thing that total privatization would do is restore parental freedom and responsibility. And that includes financial responsibility, because responsibility that doesn't include financial responsibility is bogus. Parents need to be writing checks to schools, because in that way they will realize that there's something of value they're giving up for their kids' education, and therefore they will really care about it. If something is free, or if it appears to be free, it's cheapened in the eyes of people. And that's what's happened to education. It's free, it seems to be free, it seems to be given to them. It's not really free. The bill is packed into the tax bill, but it's not very visible. And so it's cheapened in their eyes. So it will restore freedom. The second thing it will restore is real quality and creativity, because we'll have entrepreneurship. people will be free to come up with new ideas and offer them in the marketplace to parents. And so we'll get a blossoming of creative ideas, things that bureaucrats will never come up with. We just know it. Bureaucrats are just not very good at coming up with creative solutions to the problems. So I think those are two pretty good things, freedom and creativity.
Well, okay, you're saying that the reason that it was taken away from the parents was because intellectuals said, okay, we're better at making decisions for what your kids are going to do than you are.
Right.
Don't you think that in some situations today that still holds true?
Well, a lot of people think it's true for somebody else, but never for them. So if you go around and ask everybody, everyone will say, well, it's not true. I don't need that kind of help, but other people do. But nobody will ever admit that, yes, I need that kind of help. We trust parents to decide to make religious decisions for their kids. That seems like a pretty important thing. If we're not going to trust them with education, why are we going to trust them with religion? Religion is an important thing. You can bring your kid up believing some pretty bad things in the guise of religion or good things, and yet we leave that to freedom. And somehow it works out. Freedom works. That's what people don't seem to understand. It works pretty well. It doesn't mean that every parent has to be a teacher, although homeschooling, I think, will have a big part of any totally private situation. It's growing all the time, but that's not the only way. Not everyone has the time or the temperament, let's say. So they don't need to be trained teachers, but they're able to make decisions. They can get information about what's a good school and what isn't a good school from a variety of ways, from neighbors, from books and directories that will be published that will rate schools. There are all kinds of ways people can get information, just the way they find doctors for their kids. They ask their neighbors, who'd you take your kid to? Oh, is he good? No, he's not so good. Okay, I'll go to another guy. People are not stupid, even inner-city people. Inner-city people are showing how smart they are. They want to get out of the government schools desperately. Anytime they start some program, whether it's a private voucher scholarship program or even a public voucher system where they have like a few slots, thousands and thousands of parents sign up for it, many more than they can handle, because they know that these schools are rotten and they want the kids out of them. I think they're smarter than the rest of us.
Well, I could tell you countless stories about when I was in high school, and I even see it in college, of students who don't necessarily maybe belong there, aren't trying as hard maybe as the others, but isn't it still necessary that they're getting an education, because don't we all need to function in society? If we were to go and do this, aren't we going to be dumbing down the kids in our schools, or does society just not care or doesn't even know? Are we going to make this whole thing worse?
Yeah, but if it's happening now, maybe it's because of the government schools. Dumbing down is exactly what those government schools have been doing. Look at the textbooks. Textbooks have been systematically dumbed down over the years with vocabulary, with the concepts that are provided, that are introduced. They're getting dumber all the time. Kids are different. Not every kid will flourish in the format of the traditional school, which was really set up along the lines of the factory at the turn of the century, where you put a kid in one side, he goes down an assembly line, and they gets spit out on the other end as the good citizen. That was the model. Very few kids are suited for that. So today, when kids get restless, they say, well, it's the kid's fault, and we'll put them on drugs. So after he takes his Ritalin, he then goes to a class on, just say no to drugs. All this makes a lot of sense, of course. It doesn't make any sense if you're thinking clearly. A lot of kids don't belong in that form of education, and a lot of kids who don't maybe would be better off being apprentices or learning a trade, and later when they decide they're interested in more academic subjects, going back. There's not one way to do it. But we do, when we try to fit everybody into a one-size-fits-all system, which is essentially what we have, we do a lot of violence to kids. We bore them, or we drive them into things like drugs or violence or suicide or other forms of nihilism.
Okay, I'm a parent, hypothetically here, I'm a parent. I have a kid who really wants to excel and take a lot of these academic courses at one of these really good schools. I can't pay for it. How does that get justified? I mean, the government's not going to help me. So we're going to have a student go to a lesser school, even though that they're probably capable of going to a school that's going to cost more.
Well, look, there's a couple things to say to that. It's certainly true that people with more money can buy more things or more expensive things than people with less money. That's sort of true by definition. That's true. That's the nature of a free society. On the other hand, there are a lot of other ways that gets offset through foundations that raise money for good students who don't have the money to go to top school. Private schools have long had the sliding scales of tuition that take into account the financial situation of the family. In other words, there's lots of private ways that can be compensated for. But that's not a guarantee. But that doesn't even if a kid who's very talented can't go to the best school, that doesn't mean that kid is doomed. That kid will get the most out of even a fair school and can still go on to great things. Look, there are kids who have simply dropped out of school who have done great things, who have gone on to make a lot of money, to be businessmen or whatever. A kid's fate is not doomed by the fact that he can't get into the best elementary and high school possible. That's just wrong.
Okay, and final question here. For those parents out there who might actually think this is a good idea, a good course of action, what can they do?
Well, this is tough because there's some very strong interests which would be arrayed against this position. The teachers' unions are not going to lightly give up the power that they have. That's why they try to thwart every even the most minor move toward changing the system. Even something as minor as merit pay within the public school system, they fight that tooth and nail. So they're not going to give an inch on that. I think what's happening, and what we'll see more and more of, is that parents are just not waiting for the politicians to act. They're just taking matters into their own hands. In the 1990s, homeschooling has tripled. Many more kids are going to private schools of all kinds, secular and religious, than ever before. There are an awful lot of non-Catholics in Catholic schools just because they want out of the public schools. So parents are doing it already. So somebody who has their kids in the public school and they're not satisfied need to look into the alternatives that are already open to them. They just need to look around. I wouldn't be waiting for the politicians to do something about this.
Okay, Sheldon Richman, the author of the book Separating School and State, How to Liberate America's Families. Certainly education, a very hot topic for debate. We're going to continue talking about education right after this.
With the holidays just around the corner,
We would like to extend our season's greetings.
And a Happy New Year to all of our viewers.
in the new millennium.
We will see you back here in February.
Introducing new frequent phone hours.
Use the phone just 8 hours a week and get this free phone cradle. Use it 12 hours and get a speakerphone.
Use it 15 hours and get this cool headset.
Or stay on the phone 20 hours a week
And get a pasty complexion.
flabby body, and a great new nickname at school.
Exercised lately?
As the holiday season nears and the smell of chestnuts roasting,
And the falling snow are making this holiday season a special one.
I'm Christy Herman.
And I'm Dave Marsh from the Wednesday Night News Team. Season's greetings and happy holidays from all of us here at TV5.
It's not just about making plans. It's about making a difference and taking an interest, not just earning it. At Edwards, it's more than investing. It's about knowing you. Edward Jones, investing in you and your dreams.
In Clarion, see Gary Martin, located on Main Street. Phone 226-7896.
And we are back. Today's show may make a little bit better radio than TV. We're going to be doing another phone interview. Some interesting stuff, though, talking about education. The last segment didn't necessarily agree with everything Sheldon Richmond was saying, but maybe it's good to get some outside viewpoints on things. But now joining us on the phone is Charlotte Iserbyt, the author of this book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Yeah, maybe you know that has happened. It could be certainly happening in a school near you. Charlotte, thanks for joining us. Could we first start off by you giving us an overview of this immense book?
book is a chronological paper trail, documents verbatim quotes from those individuals and organizations, etc., that have, and the government, that have been responsible for low test scores, immoral behavior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, over the years. The dumbing down, I call it, the dumbing down of our nation, starting with, actually, I think there's an entry that starts in 1760-something. And it's done chronologically, and the chips fall as they may, but nobody is sacred in that book. But I didn't purposely go out to identify any individual people. So politicians on the left and the right, educators on the left and the right, get hit. And organizations, it's basically a very factual record of how this great nation lost the finest education system in the world and ended up with one of the worst in the world, and that it was not a mistake. It was deliberate. And the number one culprit, probably agencies that were responsible, the United Nations, the U.S. Department of Education, and then major influence, probably even more than the latter two, would be the Carnegie Corporation. And the Carnegie Corporation's role is spelled out very clearly with verbatim quotes from 1934 on, all the way to 1999, about 8 or 9 vital entries, including the agreements with the Soviet Academy of Science. And I'm just trying to, it also includes, to lighten it up a bit, some marvelous articles that I chose as, to illustrate that the problem is not only recognized by persons like myself, but by the Atlantic Monthly and Kurt Vonnegut's wonderful Harrison Bergeron and James Clavell's The Children's Hour. He was the one who wrote Shogun. And A.M. Rosenthal from the New York Times in regard to our horrible trade policy with brutal regimes, which people might think has nothing to do with education, but it does. So the book has got sort of broken up so that it doesn't get tiresome. And each individual entry, regardless of where you pick it up, stands on its own. Doesn't depend on any other entry. Although when you start putting them together, when you put the whole thing together, you see the picture very clearly.
Last week, it was the Department of Education came out. They had all these goals set for the year 2000, basically saying, hey, these goals are certainly not going to be met by the year 2000. We've made some progress, but it's not totally where we want to be. What is your reaction to that?
Love it. I love it so that that is a great tribute to Joe Blow and Mary Smith or whatever out there who've been fighting this thing tooth and nail, and the media has not covered these battles, and many of these battles have been highly successful. And I know that the multinational corporations who are behind the whole thing, just like they're behind GATT and NAFTA and everything else and world government and all, they have been very upset by the problems that they've had in trying to restructure the schools, especially upset with with good teachers behind closed doors who are, thwarting their efforts. There are a lot of good teachers out there who hate what's going on. And what's going on is basically changing our form of government from a free, individualistic, economy to a planned economy through the schools. And, so they're very upset about it, and I thought it was great. In fact, I think I even have it in the book. One of my entries is that, they're not going to, when we hit 2000, it can't be called Goals 2000 anymore. So they're going to call it American Goals. They don't dare put a date on it.
Obviously you're saying the system not working too much in its current form. What can we do to make the system better?
Well, my solution is in the back of the book, and it has nothing to do with letting the public schools collapse. As harsh as I am and critical, and I have been for 30 years, of American public education, what was happening to it, I believe that the governance system, which is elected officials, and we've got the buildings, and we've got, the structure is there, should remain intact. We've got to get rid of the United States Department of Education. There's no reason why that cannot be done. The state departments of education have got to go, and of course they would go probably if we got rid of the U.S. Department, because 70 to 80% of the operating costs of our state departments of education, yours in Pennsylvania and mine here, are paid for by the federal government. My old office, the U.S. Department of Education. And so once they're crippled, once the state departments of education are crippled, we go back to the local level the way it used to be, which gave us the finest system in the world. And people say, oh, we can't do that. Ronald Reagan was meant to do that. And actually, it could have been done. Certainly, the major influence, which was the research arm in the Department of Education, which is where I worked, it was suggested that be abolished by the head of the research arm, Edward Curran. He recommended that to the president, and unfortunately, the Secretary of Education was furious when he found out that the director of the National Institute of Education had recommended that his own office be abolished, which would have taken all the garbage out of the schools. The whole plan would have gone. He was so mad that he fired this distinguished educator, and Ronald Reagan let it stand. And so everybody's talking about charter schools, which are public schools anyway. You have to, that's federally funded charter schools. They're talking about tuition tax credits, vouchers, all these things that sound so good. And this is a Trojan horse. In order for the global system to be implemented with the planned economy, the school to work, et cetera, they have to capture the private sector. And the only way to capture the private sector is through money. And so that's exactly what our conservative friends are falling for. And I just say, if they could just remove themselves to the boardroom at the Waldorf Astoria or wherever at the UN and sit down in a leather chair with all of these guys, David Rockefeller, the head of the NEA, they all work together, Theodore Sizer, the whole crowd, sit down with them and listen to them talking about how we cannot let these fringe groups, the private sector, operate on its own any longer, and how are we going to get them? We have to have them, because otherwise our data, the computerized data, will be skewed. So how do we get them? And they all sit there and say, well, the only way we can get them is through money, through vouchers, through tuition tax credits, etc. So I say that is really far more dangerous. That method, that's the way we're moving right now. If the Wall Street Journal does one more article on this, I don't know what I'm going to do, but it makes it very obvious to me that the Wall Street Journal, that I happen to love, but I don't like it on this one subject. It is so supportive of choice, and I know why, because they're all behind this. All the school to work, partnerships with the public and private sector. That is nothing but corporate fascism at the best. That's the Soviet system. It's the failed German system. That's what they're putting in. That's what our Senate voted 98-2 to put in. This is a system we don't want, and I prefer the present mess we've got in the public school system to that which is going to be forever. Lifelong learning, lifelong training in a very, very totalitarian system, which will be under the umbrella always of the school district, because you're going to have all your services, school-based clinics, everything lifelong. That's the plan. And working with the public, with the government schools, working with the corporations, funneling out the necessary quotas of workers, no choice, no upward mobility for our children. And I know this. This is all in my book. It's all proven. And this has got to get out to the average American. There will be no choice whatsoever for their children under this system being put in right now, which it was not necessarily Clinton's fault. The Republicans love to say it was Clinton. It started under Reagan, and it was under William Bennett, Lamar Alexander. Then Clinton came along and picked up. He was able to get it passed by the Senate. Under Bush, they didn't get any statutory stuff in, although Bush, in my book, there's his statement in the congressional record where he's talking about apprenticeships and the planned economy and everything. So it's not, that everybody's involved. Republicans and Democrats at the top are involved in this, and it's really a very bad. It's outrageous. I mean, it's outrageous change our form of government without ever asking us if we wanted it to be changed.
Well, certainly a lot of interesting insights into education. Thank you, Charlotte Elizabeth, for joining us. And you can call to get her book. You can also find it online. We're running short on time, so we'll take a break. Season's greetings to you from all of us here at Feedback. Don't spend too much or eat too much in the coming months. Enjoy the holiday season and don't forget to tune into Feedback, same time and same place next February. Once again, happy holidays.
Happy holidays from TV5.
All right, thanks, to our authors. We're totally out of time. No time to talk to you. We'll see you tomorrow night with Dr. Stanton Green, Dean of College of Arts and Sciences here at Clarion. See ya.